School Mind by Triads 101, Cell Theory of Biology. Hi chicos and chicas. Greetings from your science teacher, Mr. T, from your friendly JJ Center at Garner Beds, Austin, ISD. Today I have great news for you. For herein and now, we're inaugurating the brand new series of School Mind by Triads 101 with a presentation of the cell theory from the science of biology. Now we must move on from the general to the particular, having our final destination, the cell theory of biology. But before we get there, there are still some hurdles to clear along the way. Let's start with the very name of the chapter number 7, Cell Structure and Function. It is very common in science to refer to the structure and function of a theory. But what, may I ask, does this all mean? I mention it because structure and function regularly shows up as the title of the chapter that introduces the theory of a science. But to what exactly the structure and function refers to is never clarified in the actual text. It's taken as already understood and never mentioned again. In following, we'll try to illustrate what this means employing our newly found tool of the triads. The short story is that structure corresponds to what holds the theory together as a whole, while function is what the parts supposedly do within the whole setup. That is, that structure views things from the whole, while function views it from the parts, sort of complementary views, such that together they comprise the universal or the concept. The concept, or the universal, is understood as unity in diversity, hence the word universal. In our case in point, the whole's perspective would be the structure, the parts' perspective would be the function, all the while the whole and the parts as unity and diversity would be the concept of the cell. This we now display in the cell structure and function slide. The title of chapter 7 is Cell Structure and Function, which means the structure and function of the cell. We represent this title by way of the triad. On the imaginary axis corresponding to spirit or right brain, we put structure. On the horizontal real axis corresponding to body or left brain, we put function. And we put corresponding to the mind or midbrain cell theory as part of the hypotenuse. Underneath, we break it up into the theory, into the real and imaginary components as theory, function plus I, structure. And the same thing with body, mind, body, and spirit, and midbrain, left brain, and right brain. Now we're finally at the doorsteps of our goal of explaining the cell theory in biology. By the way, worth noting in passing that given the importance of cell theory in biology, surprisingly it actually comes to occupy a very modest place in the textbook. In any case, the cell is characterized space-wise by separating itself from the surroundings by way of a membrane, and additionally it is characterized equally well time-wise by way of the code of unfolding the potential in the DNA. Let's now proceed to present the slide of the two characteristics of a cell. The two characteristics of a cell, despite, and I quote from the text, despite their differences, all cells have two characteristics in common. They are surrounded by a barrier called a cell membrane, and at some point in their lives, they contain the molecule that carries biological information, the DNA. We represent, by way of our triad, the two characteristics of a cell. On the vertical axis, imaginary corresponding to the spirit, life, and time, we place the DNA. On the horizontal real axis, corresponding to the body, the inert, and space, we place the membrane. And on the hypotenuse, corresponding to the mind, the living, and mass, we place the cell. Underneath the line, we break it up into real and imaginary components. In other words, the cell is the real component, membrane, and the imaginary, the DNA, and likewise, mind, body, spirit, living, the inert, and life, and finally, mass, the real component is space, and the imaginary so is the time. After much ado, it is the case that we finally arrive at our destination, the cell theory of biology, by the triads. What we notice is that there are three postulates in the theory of the cell in biology. By now, we should have a good handle in using our power tool triads so that we should have no problem identifying the three parts of the triad. The starting point is to identify the correspondent to the spirit, which is wherein things kick off, so to speak. Of the three postulates, we notice that the principle of life or spirit, not surprisingly, takes the form of a continuance of something that is lost in primeval time. It states that the new comes from the old, and I quote, "New cells are produced from existing cells," unquote, leaving pending the categorical question of the origin of primeval life to begin with. This, in any case, we rightly identify with spirit, same which goes on the vertical axis. Next in line would be to identify the body correspondent. This, in similar procedure, we search for clue words such as many or mass or the like. As if jumping out of the page, we capture the postulate that, quote, "all living things are composed of cells," unquote. Finally, the mind correspondent will be given away by containing such clues as theory or structure and function as we saw and the like. This we immediately identify as well with, quote, "cells are the basic units of structure and function in living things," unquote. So now we have the triad out of the three interlocking postulates of cell theory. In following, we'll present the cell theory triad of biology in a slide. The cell theory triad. We summarize, and I quote, "The cell theory states the three postulates. 1. All living things are composed of cells. Second postulate, cells are the basic units of structure and function in living things. Third postulate, new cells are produced from existing cells." We represent these three postulates in the triad form of the right triangle. On the imaginary axis, the vertical, corresponding to the spirit and life, we identify new cells are produced from existing cells. On the horizontal axis, real axis, corresponding to the body and the inert, we identify all living things are composed of cells. Likewise, on the hypotenuse, corresponding to the mind and the living, we identify cells are the basic units of structure and function in living things. Finally, at the bottom, we summarize that cell theory, as we remember structure and function, is the real part, living things made up of cells, plus the pre-existing cells. In other words, the one postulate and the other two postulates, the real and imaginary component. And likewise, mind is made up of the real component, body, and the imaginary component, spirit. And the living, likewise, is made up of the inert, the real, plus the I, life, or the imaginary component. Well, that's all, chicos and chicas. Our hope is that you keep watching the other videos of the series School Mind by Triads 101. One thing to keep in mind in this effort is that the different videos tend to help each other in the understanding of science. And thank you and have a good day. And don't forget to use your right brain, keeps you out of trouble. Use a triad, that way you use the whole brain. Thank you very much and have a good day again. Bye.